The slap landed with a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the soft clatter of plates and the low hum of the diner, a sound so wrong it seemed to freeze time itself, and for a moment no one breathed as an elderly widow sat trembling in a red vinyl booth, her cloudy eyes wide with shock, her thin hand hovering midair as if she could still catch the dignity that had just been knocked from her face. In that instant, cruelty wore a human form, and kindness seemed painfully far away. If you believe that kindness still matters in this world, that second chances can change lives, and that standing up for the vulnerable makes us all stronger, then take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach the hearts that need them most. The diner sat at the edge of a quiet mountain town, the kind of place where people nodded at each other even if they did not know names, where coffee was poured without asking, and where an elderly woman like Margaret Hale could come every Tuesday morning and feel, at least for an hour, that she was not entirely alone in the world. Margaret was 82 years old, a widow for nearly 2 decades, her life shaped by loss in ways that had softened her voice but hardened her spirit. Her husband had died of a sudden heart attack years ago, her house had grown too quiet after that, and eventually her only son had left to serve his country, carrying with him her pride and her constant, unspoken fear. The diner had become her small sanctuary, a place where the same booth, the same waitress, and the same slice of apple pie gave structure to days that otherwise blended together. That morning, Margaret's hands shook slightly as she lifted her fork. Arthritis had made even simple movements an effort, but she never complained. She wore a knitted cardigan she had made herself, its sleeves loose from years of washing, and her white hair was pulled back neatly, as if order in appearance could bring order to a world that no longer made sense. She did not notice the man standing behind her at first, a large figure casting a shadow that felt colder than the winter light outside. He was impatient, irritated by the slow rhythm of the diner, by the fact that someone like her occupied space he felt entitled to. The man was called Frank in passing by others, though names hardly mattered when behavior spoke louder. He had the restless energy of someone who carried anger like a second skin, the kind that looked for an outlet in the weakest places. He had been waiting for a table and decided, without hesitation or decency, that Margaret was taking too long. His frustration grew visible in the tightening of his jaw, the tapping of his fingers, the way his eyes narrowed at her frail form. When she did not move fast enough, when she did not even hear his sharp words over the ringing in her ears, his anger snapped into something far worse. What followed was not just a slap, but an act of humiliation. Margaret's head turned slightly, her cheek burning, her body frozen in disbelief. The diner fell silent. Forks paused midair, coffee cups hovered inches from lips, and somewhere in the back a grill hissed softly, unaware that a line had just been crossed. Margaret did not cry out. She did not scream. She simply sat there, stunned, the world tilting as memories of past losses rushed in, as if to remind her that life had a cruel way of taking from her again and again. In that silence, something shifted. Not in Frank, who stood breathing heavily, his sense of power momentarily satisfied, but in the room itself. People looked away, ashamed of their own stillness, of the fear that kept them glued to their seats. It was easier to pretend nothing had happened than to confront a man who seemed capable of worse. Margaret slowly lowered her hand, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She whispered apologies no one should ever have to make, her voice barely audible, her dignity fraying but not yet broken. What no one in that diner knew was that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a reckoning that would ripple far beyond those walls. Because as Margaret sat there, trying to gather herself, the bell above the diner door chimed softly, and a new presence entered the room, one that carried with it discipline, restraint, and a history written in sacrifice. Her son had come home. Daniel Hale had not planned to stop at the diner that morning. He had just returned from deployment, the weight of months spent in harsh places still clinging to him, his mind struggling to adjust to the quiet normalcy of home. He wore civilian clothes that could not quite hide the posture of a Navy SEAL, the alertness in his eyes, the controlled strength in every step. At his side walked his military working dog, a German shepherd trained for loyalty and protection, its calm demeanor masking the precision it was capable of. Daniel had learned long ago to read rooms quickly, and the moment he stepped inside, he felt the tension hanging thick in the air. He saw his mother before he saw anything else. It was instinct, the kind forged by love and years of distance bridged only by letters and brief calls. He noticed the way she sat stiffly, the redness on her cheek, the men standing too close, too proud. In that instant, the world narrowed to a single point, a familiar protective fire igniting in his chest. But Daniel did not rush forward blindly. Training had taught him patience, awareness, control. He took in the scene, the fear in the eyes of others, the shame, the silence, and understood that this was not just about one slap, but about the kind of person who would do it. Margaret looked up and saw him then, her heart skipping painfully as disbelief gave way to overwhelming relief. She had not expected him. She had not wanted him to see her like this. But there he was, solid and real, the boy she had raised, now a man shaped by discipline and honor. Daniel met her gaze, and though his face remained calm, something unbreakable passed between them, a promise without words that she was no longer alone. Frank noticed him too, noticed the dog, the way the room seemed to subtly realign around this newcomer. He scoffed at first, dismissive, unaware of the gravity of what he had done or who stood before him. Daniel approached slowly, deliberately, placing himself between his mother and the men, his presence a quiet wall. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood there, the weight of his service, his restraint, and his values filling the space where violence had just occurred. The diner seemed to breathe again. People shifted, emboldened by the calm authority Daniel projected. The waitress found her voice and moved closer, others murmured, and for the first time, Frank's confidence faltered. He saw not just a son, but a man who represented consequences, accountability, and a moral line that could no longer be ignored. The dog remained still, watchful, its loyalty an extension of Daniel's own. Margaret felt tears finally spill over, not from pain, but from release. Years of loneliness, of carrying grief quietly, of navigating a world that often overlooked her, poured out in that moment. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that strength did not always roar, that sometimes it simply showed up when needed most. What happened next was not explosive or dramatic in the way movies often portray justice. There was no shouting match, no physical retaliation. Instead, there was something far more powerful. Frank was confronted not by fists, but by collective courage. The manager stepped in, authorities were called, and witnesses, once silent, spoke up. The slap that had been meant to diminish an elderly woman became the catalyst for accountability. Frank's anger, stripped of its audience and its power, looked small and pathetic under the weight of what he had done. As the situation resolved, Daniel stayed by his mother's side. He listened as she apologized for causing trouble, and gently reminded her that she had done nothing wrong. He saw the way others now looked at her with respect, with regret for not acting sooner, and he understood that this moment would linger in their minds long after the day ended. When they finally left the diner together, the cold mountain air felt different. Margaret held onto Daniel's arm, her steps slow but steadier, her heart lighter despite the morning's cruelty. She realized that strength had many forms, that surviving loss had given her resilience, and that love, when it returned, could heal wounds she thought permanent. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of the power of standing up for others and the quiet heroism found in everyday moments, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and let us know in the comments how it made you feel. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive. And before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment with a single word that represents what this story made you feel, whether it is hope, justice, love, or courage. Your words matter more than you know. In the days that followed, Margaret returned to the diner, not because she had forgotten what happened, but because she refused to let fear take something else from her. This time, she was greeted with warmth, with people who smiled a little longer, who asked how she was doing, who had learned something about themselves that day. Daniel stayed in town for a while, helping her around the house, fixing small things, filling the quiet spaces with laughter and shared memories. He knew he would leave again someday, duty calling him back, but he also knew that moments like these were why he served, why he endured. The slap that had once echoed through that diner became a reminder that cruelty thrives in silence, but fades when confronted by courage and compassion. Margaret's story spread quietly through the town, not as gossip, but as a lesson. And for those who heard it, it changed the way they saw the elderly woman in the red booth, the way they saw themselves, and the way they understood the responsibility we all share to protect one another. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest moments there is light waiting to step through the door, please engage with this video, leave your thoughts, and help us spread kindness one story at a time. Because somewhere, someone needs to know that they are not alone, and that help can arrive when they least expect it.